welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, August 2nd around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about kind of an underrated storyline going into the season. Which of these states is going to have a bigger impact on the college football season, Florida or Texas? Definitely a very interesting conversation that we will unpack in segment 1. Then in segment 2, we will get to all of my playoff predictions. I have a very interesting 12 teams, and I've kind of backed myself into a little bit of a corner with some of the conference predictions I had, but at the end of the day, I'm going to roll with my 12, and at the end of the year, you might be able to make a little bit of fun of me. But at the in the third segment, we will get into my picks for Heisman, Biletnikoff, Doak Walker, all of the big-time awards in the college football season, Joe Moore Award, the best O-line. I'll give out all of mine, and that's a ton of predictions coming for you in segment 3. Then we'll get a little bit of a fall camp update. There are a ton of things happening all across the country. We'll get you updated on Texas, Notre Dame, Alabama, and so many more teams. Then we'll get a little bit up to date on a Friday wrap-up, get all the headlines that we have missed throughout the week, some of the ones that you guys are definitely going to want to know. So we will break all that down at the very end. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and I think that's always good for the both of us. Again, that is GSMCpodcast.net. But let's jump right in, and let's talk about this Texas versus Florida battle, because this is one of those kind of underrated storylines going into this season. There's so many different things to focus on in this season that this is one of those that obviously is going to fall a little bit by the wayside. But I do think it's a really interesting question, because these are two states that for the last little bit have kind of been a little bit in the dark. You know, Miami not necessarily playing the level of football they've wanted over the last decade or so. Texas in that exact same boat. A&M kind of in that boat as well. So there's been a little bit of a lull in some of these states when it comes to elite college football play. I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case this year. So let's go ahead and jump into this thing, and let's start with Florida and break down the Florida Gators to start, because they are a very, very funny team this year, because they're going to be a really good team. I feel very good, confident about that. Now, that won't necessarily manifest itself into a ton of wins. I think 7-5, maybe 8-4 is something that Florida fans could be definitely really, really happy about. But I think it's going to be a really good team. And I think every time someone shows up on Saturday having to play Florida, they can't take it lightly, because Florida will beat you. So I do think this is a really good team. Now, they might not be in the top 25 at the end of the year, but they absolutely are a team that is going to have plenty to say on any given Saturday against pretty much anyone that they're playing. Then their big-time rival at the end of the year, Florida State, they have the playoff in mind. There's no two ways about that. They got left out last year. They're trying to leave no doubt this year. And I have them going 10-2, I believe, in the ACC. So I don't necessarily think they're going to be this world-beating team, but definitely a team that can get into the playoff. Definitely a team that can sneak in, and we'll get to my predictions in the second segment. But this is a team that has everything at their disposal. There's nothing that Florida State can't do this year. They can absolutely win a national title. They can absolutely have a Heisman winner in DJ. They can do a ton of really cool things, but a lot of things have to come into play, and a lot of things have to kind of work out the way that Seminole fans hope that it does. So this is a really, really good team. Everything is on the table for Florida State, but definitely a couple of things that just have to kind of line up for them to really hit their big-time goals. Miami's kind of in the same boat as Florida State. They absolutely want to go to the playoff. They absolutely want to have something to say once they get to the playoff. So they want to win an ACC title. There's no two ways about that. And if they were able to pull that off, they would be the story of college football. You would have to look no further than Coral Gables, Florida, when you're talking about how big this college football season is, because that is a huge brand, and one that has not realized its potential in quite some time. And I think a lot of people think that they might never again, which is a little bit goofy. But on the other side of that, I think some people just don't fully understand the power that Miami can be. It's going to be really real if they hit their ceiling this upcoming year, make it to the playoff as I have them doing. So I do think this is a really dangerous team, and I think they're going to have plenty to say about this upcoming season. UCF is a really, really fun team as well. I think they're a team that is getting a ton of hype as you go into this Big 12 season. As we get closer and closer, it feels like the more and more people start to come around to the UCF way of things. They have tons of talent on that team, led by RJ Harvey, the really talented running back, but KJ Jefferson coming in is absolutely huge. Penny Boone, the exact same. Jarvarius Johnson on the outside at wide receiver. You have Nigel Kelly on the defense. There is a ton of ability on this team, and a lot of it came from the transfer portal. So another team that has to work some kinks out for sure in fall camp, but the ceiling is remarkably high for that team, that is for sure. And then USF is a team that's going to have plenty of effect on this college football season. They absolutely could be your group of 5 representative in the college football playoff. Frankly, if I had it my way and I got to pluck the teams, that's probably who I'd pick, because Byron Brown is one of the most special players in the entire country, regardless of the level that you're playing on, and he's one of those guys that I'd love to see in a playoff type game. So I do think USF could end up being the only Florida team that makes the college football playoff because of some of the paths that the other teams that we just unpacked kind of have. So they could be able to brag at the end of the year, and that would be a huge thing for them. But overall, definitely a team that absolutely will have a ton to say about this college football season. Then you also have teams like FAU, FIU, Florida A&M, all in the FBS from Florida, and none of them are going to be huge factors in their conference necessarily. Tom Herman and the Owls could absolutely make a run in the American, or maybe FIU, they have 11 returning starters, so maybe they make a run in the Conference USA, but overall, none of those teams are really going to have too big of an impact, so not necessarily factoring them in too much into this equation, but if someone does shock me, then they absolutely will be factored in. Moving on to Texas, and we'll start with the Longhorns here. They have title on their mind. There's no doubt about that. Steve Sarkisian shows up to his job every day now and knows that he has his guys in the building, knows that he has a championship roster in that building, and that is invaluable. He knows that everything is the way that he wants it for the first time, probably in his time during while they're at Texas, although a lot of things were in place last year. I think even he would tell you there were a couple of things that he didn't necessarily love about that team. But I do think there's a team that all the preseason hype is there. They absolutely can live up to it, and they absolutely can win a national title this year. But some things have to come into place that weren't necessarily there last year in terms of finishing games, in terms of not taking your foot off the gas pedal, that type of thing. So we'll see how that season develops for Texas, but absolutely a national title contender. Texas A&M is a very interesting team because I think it depends who you ask on what their expectations are this year, because I think there's Aggie fans that would tell you they want to get 8-4 or better. I think there's Aggie fans that would tell you they want to be competing for an SEC title. So there's definitely some wiggle room, I suppose, and it's definitely a team that could go anywhere from, in my opinion, 7-5 to 12-0. This is a very, very interesting team, and definitely one that has a very high ceiling, but it's also a first-year head coach with a quarterback that hasn't necessarily played an entire season of football yet, so you can't necessarily feel overly great about it right this second. But they absolutely are a playoff-level team if everything clicks the way they want, especially Connor Wegman, and frankly, it looks like a really, really fun team to watch. So I do think Texas A&M is going to have plenty to say about the season, although they might not be that national title contender that you think. That could change very quickly, especially in Week 1 against Notre Dame. But SMU is another team in this state, and they absolutely are a team that is going to have a ton to say about the ACC. I absolutely think they do. I believe I have them going 10-2, finishing, I believe, 3rd or 4th in the conference. So this is a very, very good team. They're still adjusting to Power 4 life, so that will obviously be something to kind of watch, and we'll see how they develop into that. I frankly think that physically they're ready to play in the ACC tomorrow, but we'll see what happens. It's obviously a big-time adjustment, but I do think they kind of are a boom or bust team. I'm obviously betting on them, but overall, definitely a team that things could go a little bit sideways in 2024 if they're not careful. TCU and Texas Tech are two teams that, frankly, are sitting a little bit away from a Big 12 title this upcoming year, but as we've all learned, I think, throughout this offseason is the Big 12 can go sideways very fast, and things could get very weird very quickly, and I think particularly Texas Tech, TCU as well, just a little bit, I think are both teams that have the chance to make some noise. I think they do have a ton of talent on that team and a ton of ability, and I think they're going to be able to make the necessary plays. Not necessarily, wow people, make all of the plays in the world, but absolutely be teams that could play spoiler in that conference. And then you got Texas State and UTSA, and these are both teams that absolutely have a chance to be that Group of Five representative in the playoff. There's no doubt about that. Texas State is second in odds in the Sun Belt, and UTSA is sitting at third odds in the American. So both have a great shot here. They're obviously going to have some things go their way. Texas State has Jordan McLeod coming in from JMU, so a lot of real good talent on that team. GJ Kinney has really been building stuff up over there, and then Jeff Traylor is one of my favorite coaches in the entire country. So I do think this is a very interesting duo, and absolutely one that will have plenty to say in both of their conferences this year. And then you got teams like Baylor. You got Houston, Rice, North Texas, Sam Houston, and UTEP all in the FBS from Texas. So there are a lot more teams, that is for sure. And that's kind of my big-time takeaway here is overall, I think there's awesome teams on both states. There's no two ways about that. Texas, Florida State, Miami, all are looking at a national title as a real option this upcoming season, and especially a conference title is absolutely an option for those guys. But I do think it is one of those things that Texas has more options. They have more teams that can possibly make that magical run into the playoff and definitely make some noise for that state. But when I really get down to it, Florida has the better options. When you look at Miami, Florida State, even Florida, all of those teams can absolutely make some noise. And then you have a team in USF that absolutely can do the exact same. So I do think there is an ability for Florida hypothetically to get two teams into this playoff field. I don't necessarily know who those two will be, but I do think that there's a little bit more of ability on the Florida side of things than the Texas side. I think if you were to get two Texas teams in that playoff, likely one would have to be one of those Group of Five teams, UTSA or Texas State. So that's obviously an interesting thing to kind of watch throughout the season and kind of an underrated storyline. When you talk about this upcoming college football season, there's so many different things going on in 2024, but this is going to be a really, really fun thing to watch, and I will take Florida to be the more impactful state overall in college football, but Texas absolutely has a ton of teams that can make some noise this year and possibly get two teams into that playoff this upcoming year. But absolutely will be a very interesting thing to watch throughout the year and a ton of teams to keep a tab on there. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to do playoff predictions. I'll give you my 12 teams. I will give you all my picks and my eventual national champion. This is obviously something that is going to be really hard to pick because you got to put 12 teams in this thing, no longer 4. So definitely a difficult thing to figure out, but I feel pretty good about my 12. So I'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.